more than 1 million Iraqis had been passing away in the preceding decade. During the Iraq War, estimated the number of innocent civilians who had passed away exceeded over 500,000.
But what's the financial fallout of that? It's almost as though that they take these steps, millions of people die.
It failed. This is a huge problem with extreme liberal capitalist economy. In addition to that, that money is not going to you and me. That money is going to the banks, who then lend that money out to you. And they're lending that money out to you on interest, right?
That they also had issues with insurance, to say that it's got elements of uncertainty,
Correct.
Gambling and interest.
When it comes to Sharia-compliant finance, I see that as just as much interest-bearing, Riba-Based. That gives one solution, which is a Musharaka-based model, whereas we enter into partnership for economic gain, for profit, but we're sharing risk and reward.
Yeah, I can see it. The Italian.
Yeah, the Italian lady. She should have won the Nobel Peace Prize.
It's all political.
It's all political. It's all nonsense. That's another thing that's quite political. I mean, Nobel Peace Prize is it's become quite a bit of a joke, man.
It's lost its luster, hasn't it? When they see, what's her name? The Burmese political prisoner. Was it Aung San
You or something.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
She was placed on a pedestal for being a political prisoner for the independence of Burma. And
decades.
And
then when she came out,
yeah,
quite disappointing. I remember writing an article about her. That's like more than 15 years ago now. Saying quite a few positive things, what she was standing for, what she was writing about while she was in prison, and then come out, and then it's completely different. Yeah, I don't know, the way the
time
world
has
works
this
is
tendency of
strange.
changing the narrative of what people often took for granted. I mean, we talk about since 9/11, Muslims were maligned and seen as the enemy from within.
Yeah.
And now people, they look back at the Iraq War, and then they often say, well, there were mistakes made.
Yeah.
And they once placed their trust in the likes of George Bush and Tony Blair, and now they look at Tony Blair and say
mistakes made. I just find that so offensive. I find it utterly offensive. You can't say mistakes made when prior to the Iraq War, more than 1 million Iraqis had been passing away in the preceding decade. Following the Iraq War, or during the Iraq War, not only the Lancet but others as well estimated the number of innocent civilians who had passed away exceeded over 500,000. Okay, these are not trivial matters. Often these type of things are done by design.
Yeah.
All right. The way we've spoken about this in the past, but look, there was a need to go into Iraq. There was a need to go into Afghanistan. Okay.
Was there a need?
One second, man. There was a need to go into Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, ideally Iran, okay, to maintain global hegemony. Okay, I'm talking from a very far right-wing militaristic doctrine that seeks unipolarity. Okay, there needed to be that because you needed to control the trade routes, the economic zones, all right, to allow the US and even partially the Western Europe to retain hegemony for the next 100, 200 years.
But what's the financial fallout of that? It's almost as though that they take these steps, millions of people die.
It failed.
And it fails, but it seems to be snowballing. It's like they don't learn that lesson.
No, it's not about learning. All right. So this is a huge problem with a extreme liberal capitalist economy. Okay, which has no foundation in morality, in effect. Okay, I know we've gone on a massive tangent, but let me just make this particular point. All right, so money is created ultimately under something known as a fractional reserve system. I think many of our audience may know that. So basically, money comes into being. All right, literally in the past, it used to be printing paper. Okay, these days you press a button and woof, a bunch of other new numbers come up, and each particular code represents a dollar bill or a pound or whatever. Okay, Now, when you bring money into existence like that, you're not facilitating a real economy, right? You're having an impact on inflation, okay? In addition to that, that money is not going to you and me, all right? That money is going to the banks who then lend that money out to you, all right? And they're lending that money out to you on interest, right? So they're going to charge you 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, whatever percent interest, right? So what if you can't maintain those payments? Okay. What if your economic productivity allows you to make those payments, but that is it? Okay. What effectively is happening, all right, your economic value, right, what you're taking that loan for, so let's say you're taking a loan for £100,000 at 8% interest, all right, you have to pay back 100,000 plus 8% interest compounded over 10 years, for argument's sake, right? Okay. From a macroeconomic point of view, okay, what if you, in terms of your productive capacity, if you haven't made more than 8% in terms of value into that economic environment, that would then mean that economic environment, okay, is effectively in further deficit, okay, because you've not created any additional new wealth to repay that additional interest that is being created out of thin air. So you've got at one stage, you've got money being created out of thin air because it's being brought into existence, and then you've got the interest that is being charged on top of that money being created effectively out of thin air as well.
See,
now it's potentially created out of thin air if you don't have the productive capacity. But let's say if you are making those payments, you could be making those payments from your capital. So effectively, your asset is being stripped, right? But once your asset is stripped, and that still hasn't met the difference, what's going to happen?
Who benefits from this corrupt system, as you'd like to call it, this exploitative system?
It's like legally corrupt, man.
Who benefits from it?
We all benefit from it.
We?
No, we all benefit from it.
How?
Okay, look, the economic, and I'm not, when I say benefit, I'm not saying it's a good benefit. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that.
I want to steer this back to the topic of insurance.
We're coming on to it. Yeah, no, and it relates very well to it as well. Okay, so the economic advances that we have had in the last 200 years in terms of our technology, okay, in terms of impact on our medicine, healthcare, okay, in terms of energy infrastructure, getting people out of poverty, it could have only have happened because we were able to create that level of liquidity in this particular system. So that all looks good, right? But look on the other side. We've got an epidemic on mental health crisis.
Yeah.
We've got an epidemic of broken families. We've got an epidemic of the amount of people who are being killed in unnecessary wars and conflict around the world to maintain this particular type.
It's almost like they're forfeiting their moral, compass for the sake of financial gain.
Exactly.
See,
so this is what I meant about. Sorry, man, I keep interrupted by extreme liberal capitalism. Right?
See, this is quite interesting because part of the point in our research is that going back to insurance, this is where you have some Muslim scholars say, well, we need to get a better grasp of what conventional insurance is.
Yep.
And then some of the work that has been written in Arabic and in English is almost so they just cover the surface level.
Yep.
And I think I'm quite fortunate living within Europe. You get access to how conventional insurance works, the entire history behind it.
Yeah.
And then often I found is that some of the challenges that the Muslim world is facing in terms of coming to grasp with insurance, these were challenges that Europe were having to contend with 200-300 years earlier.
Makes sense.
It does make sense, yeah.
Totally.
So it's almost a case that part of the challenges that they found, that they also had issues with insurance to say that it's got elements of uncertainty,
correct,
gambling, and interest.
Yeah, and they developed actuarial science to
And
resolve
they
it.
developed the actuarial
Exactly.
sciences to resolve
Exactly.
it.
They did that before the scholars then, Islamic scholars,
Yeah.
then took that science and said, you
Yeah.
know what, this actually works for us as well to
Yeah.
actually guess in terms of claim rates.
So it's like a lot of the challenges that many very, very conservative
Yeah.
scholars say that, well, this is an issue that we have with insurance.
All right. So in the book, we cover something known as qadar, fate. Okay. So fate is a concept where you rely on something other than God. All right. To determine your path or determine the circumstances of your life that will actually turn up. All right. In this particular situation, when scholars are now relying on actuarial science and they justify it, okay? So where's the fate issue gone?
Yeah.
Where's the qadar issue gone?
See, this is all still fresh in my head because I covered that chapter
Yeah.
like a few days ago. And then I sent it to you. So, yo, look at this. I look at the history of insurance. And I was quite
Yeah.
fascinated by it.
Yeah.
Because it was almost like the challenges and the questions that they call mathematicians and statisticians, and even those in the church, they were having to contend with. Because what I found, those who actually issued insurance in the 17th and 18th century, they're often like the gambling dens and the offices.
Yeah.
They not only issued insurance, but they also issued like bets as well.
Yeah, exactly.
They're the ones who issued it.
Exactly.
So it's almost a case that, okay, somebody comes in from the bourgeois, from the what's it called working class, and say that, well, we'd like to take out life insurance. Okay. It wasn't the case of the the insured interest.
Yeah.
There were other extraneous factors as well to say that, well, this celebrity, he's taking taking a lot of political attention. There's a war going on. So extraneous activities were also factored in issuing these policies.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time they say that 20% of the policies issues were based on speculation rather than on the insured interest.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is something I found fascinating because a lot of the Parliament in itself and people in society were pretty much ambivalent to actually take out an insurance because they often associate that with speculation and gambling.
Yeah,
to the point much of Europe banned insurance for 100 years.
But what happened? What happened over the next 100 and 150 years? Regulation. The concept of insurable interest came into play. Okay, so you could not do any of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and it was
as you do today.
But it was spearheaded by the mathematicians and statisticians.
Yeah.
So you got people like Edmund Halley and what's his name, Daniel Defoe, who wrote Robinson Crusoe. Because I was looking at it, I said, okay, what contributions that they made? So they advanced the actuarial sciences to mitigate that risk.
Right.
Yeah. And then it was essentially legislation came in and the statisticians came in to say that the whole point of insurance is to mitigate risk. Yeah. And this is where Parliament, I think it was the Gambling Act of 1774 that came in to say that insurance can only be based on the insured interest.
Exactly, man.
So it's almost a case that the statisticians engage in legal reasoning, as they call it within Islamic thought, ijtihad, as they want to call it. It's essentially legal reasoning or reasoning in itself to remove the corrupt and corrosive aspects of insurance, to say that legislation came in, it's just insured risk. To refine the actuarial sciences,
all right. Here's something,
came in.
All right. I brought this up in my last podcast with Chris the other day. So you should watch that one as well, guys. All right. The one that I did with my colleague Chris Redman, who's a fund manager. Let's talk about substance. All right. So when we talk about filtration or Islamic investing, identifying suitable Sharia-compliant or halal investment stock. Okay, I'm just talking about one of those criteria right now. One of those criteria is you've got this debt to equity or debt to market capitalization ratio that we know about, and that ratio is generally set at 1/3. Okay, so what that means is if a company, okay, a listed company, in fact, all right, has 1/3 of its value has been as a result of, or is a third of its gross value, I guess, is as a result of, let's say, debt that has been taken on, interest-bearing debt. Okay, that stock, right, is still Sharia compliant.
Yeah,
It's still permissible.
Yeah.
Right. Now, this 1/3 relates to the popular hadith. Okay. All right. Now, the reason why it's a third is because the 1/3 is seen to be as something that is anything more than that, it will be excessive. Okay. All right. Substantial. Okay. Now, consider this particular scenario here. So we're able to invest in certain companies that could be trading in whatever, that doesn't matter, but they have taken out a loan to fund their operations and development to the tune of up to 1/3 of their value of their business, or the value of their market capitalization value of their shares. Okay, all right. Now, imagine that is a bank now, a Sharia compliant bank. Okay, that bank could effectively raise, all right, a third of its value, okay, via interest-bearing debt. Okay, clear so far? And then they lend it to me on a Sharia-compliant basis.
Right.
Okay, so, and on the Sharia-compliant basis, it's generally going to be a lot more expensive, 1-2% more. When I look at substance like that, okay, I find it very problematic. Okay, because here you have a scenario where you've got a company benefiting from conventional loans effectively, and then repurposing that loan and repackaging it up in a Sharia compliant manner.
Right.
Does that make sense?
There's a couple of things to unpack. We're talking about this point about allocating 1/3 to a non-Sharia compliant venture in terms of
non-Sharia compliant. It's just raising debt, man.
What's this hadith based on? From what I can recall, it's about there was a companion of Muhammad.
Yes, correct.
Where he wanted to donate all his estate to the what's called Islam, and then the Prophet says that's too much.
Correct.
And then he says, "Well, I want to give a half." It says, "Well, that's too much."
Correct.
Well, I want to give a third. Well, that's too much because your family has a right over the estate, but I'll accept 1/3 of it. And then by extension, that 1/3 is essentially where the Sharia compliancy comes in, right?
Correct. Now, let's say you're a small business in the UK, all right? Because that original fatwa was given in the 1990s by Sheikh Nizam Yaqubi, because he was looking at the Dow Jones, right, in the US, and looking at market cap figures, okay, over there. But what if you're an unlisted business? You're a small business in the UK, and you need developmental finance or operational finance, okay? For that business, then theoretically, all right, they can get a valuation done on their business and take 1/3 of the value of their business in conventional interest-bearing debt. Okay, all I'm trying to get across, right, is that this particular space, okay, it's not hard and fast. All right, the nature of our economic system is such that it is so difficult to get away from interest-bearing instruments. Okay, so my point is, when it comes to Sharia-compliant finance, I see that as just as much interest-bearing, okay, or riba-based, all right, as I do as a conventional interest-bearing contract.
It's something we talked about earlier, where you essentially say that the Sharia-compliant Islamic financial system is still working within the conventional financial system.
Yep.
And the tendency of trying to carve out an Islamic Sharia compliance niche is pretty much very, very difficult to do, because you're still working within that conventional financial
Yeah.
system. So, what solutions could you propose then?
Mine is quite drastic. Is and it depends on which economic setting you're actually in, and your individual circumstance is going to be very different from other people. Okay, if you're at a stage where you need to take a loan out, okay, and that loan is something that you can comfortably service, all right, not just service, but you are going to take the utility of that loan and have far greater economic impact as a result of taking that loan, then I personally don't see how it can have an impact on a macro and economic point of view to destabilize the economic system. But if you take a loan out, okay, and you can't service it, and it's just stripping your assets away, all right, within that economic system, there's still going to be a deficit. There's still going to be a debt.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Either there's going to be a debt, all right, because your assets that is being stripped away is insufficient, so there's still going to be a debt within the economic system, or you yourself are going to be in poverty because you've stripped away your assets, right? That gives one solution, which is a Musharaka-based model, whereas we enter into partnerships for economic gain, for profit, but we're sharing risk and reward. Now, Islamic mortgages, they claim to be doing that. They claim to be on a Musharaka based, right? And then they're buying the house with you. I don't think that is happening. All right? Because they're not sharing in the risk at all. They're locking in the value of their partnership at the point you signed the contract. So if, let's say, the property price goes down, all right, and the financing, so it goes below the outstanding financing, all right, they're going to still want to demand the original financing amount. So there's no true share of risk here. You've got the original cost of the asset, and then what they say is, look, all right, the house is going to cost you 100 grand, all right, but I'm going to sell it to you immediately for £200,000. But that £200,000 is something that you can pay me over the next 20 years. In my opinion, that 100 grand is interest, man. It's interest because it's not contributing to the real economy. So you've still got this macroeconomic problem happening.